Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and October is here again. Halloween is right around the corner, and most of us will be watching a lot of horror movies over the next 4 weeks. So to start the month off, I've decided to do this opinion piece video on Asian horror. Now for those of you who have not seen my video from last year, The Death of J-Horror, How Everyone Got It Wrong, you should definitely check it out. It's an assessment of the production trends of the Japanese horror film industry over the past 15 years, and it addresses a variety of misconceptions regarding that industry. You're also going to get a bunch of recommendations for movies to watch if you check that video out. I'll include a link to that video in the description box below. Now at the end of that video, I promised to make another opinion piece that expands focus outside of just Japan to include multiple countries in that region. And I said that I would compare the Asian horror film industry from recent years to the industry from the early 2000s. Well, this is that video. And I ask that you bear with me just for a few minutes while I explain my strategy and what I'm going to attempt to do in this video. Then we'll get right into the analysis. Now, if you feel like skipping my introduction here, getting right to the meat of the video, I'll include a timestamp in the description box below that'll take you directly to the analysis. So the question at hand this evening is this: were Asian horror movies better in 2003 or 2013? Now, on its surface, this question may seem utterly ridiculous to most people. 2003 was smack dab in the middle of what most people consider to be the Asian horror boom, while 2013 is way past that era. So according to popular opinion, it should be very difficult to find a year in the 2010s that can compare in quality to any year during the late 90s or early 2000s. Now, if you've seen my Death of J-Horror video, you know that I like to actually research the films that were produced when discussing industry trends, and then I try to watch as many of those films as I can, and then I spread the data and look at the trends in detail. And that's probably the best way to have an informed opinion about an industry as a whole, because the trends really pop out at you when you take the time to kind of spread the data in a nerdy little Excel sheet or something, right? And I performed that exercise for our discussion this evening. So how do we go about assessing these years? It's pretty simple, actually. I listed out all of the Asian horror films that I saw from 2003 and then 2013, and I kept them separated by year of release, and then I separated them further by country of origin, so we can look at the horror films released in each country and determine which year was better for each particular country. I think the strategy makes sense because it'll make it easier to do the comparisons, and obviously different industries have different production levels and all that other stuff. They're quite different when you look at them individually, so it's probably informative to do it that way. Of course, this is going to be a very subjective analysis. Unlike my Death of J-Horror video, which was based mostly on objective facts, this video is based on my personal opinions of the individual films. So if you end up disagreeing with me on my assessment here, there's really nothing I can say to prove you wrong, so to speak. However, there is an objective component to this analysis because there are actual production trends that I'll use to back up some of my opinions. For example, the number of films released in each year and the kinds of films released in each year are factual, and I'll be referencing those as we go along. But regardless of where you fall on this debate, I think you'll find the production trends to be interesting and even a bit surprising when we look at them side by side. But that brings me to the first question that some people will probably ask. Why did I choose to compare 2003 to 2013? Well, outside of using a neat 10-year gap between the years, I wanted to make sure that I had posted reviews of all of these films for both years on this channel in my Asian horror playlist, because they back up my opinions of all these movies. While scripting this analysis, however, I was not sure if all of my reviews for 2014 would be completed before this video was posted. So I decided to compare 2003 to 2013 partially because all of my reviews for those years are already uploaded now onto this channel. And 2013 represents the most recent year of reviews that I had completed, which kind of makes sense. You know, pick the year that's completed, the most recent year, and compare it to a year 10 years prior. In addition, I also wanted to play a little devil's advocate as well, and intentionally go against popular opinion a little bit to see if I could find a comparison that would subvert expectations and facilitate discussion. And a comparison between these two particular years I think will accomplish my goal. At least I think it will. So yes, all of the films that I'm mentioning this evening have already been reviewed in my Asian horror playlist. I'll include a link to that playlist in the description box below as well. Now, I will not be reviewing all of these films in this video because that would take forever. My purpose here is to simply classify and compare them based on their entertainment value. I might include a little sentence on each film just to give you a flavor of what it's about in case you haven't seen it. And remember, this analysis is limited to the films I've actually seen, which will be further limited to films that are available to international audiences. So, finally, I did consider analyzing more than 2 years at one time, but quickly realized that it would become convoluted and difficult to follow. 1 year versus 1 year is very neat and easy to follow. Sticking to 2 years here. So let's begin with the country that has the most significant number of releases for international audiences to view, Japan. Now we're going to look at the films I enjoyed first, and then we'll look at the films that I did not enjoy. Alright, these are the entertaining Japanese films from 2003 versus 2013, in my opinion. Now these are films that I at least moderately enjoyed, and some of them I loved. So it's quite a range here in terms of quality. But all of these films I found to be at least watchable. Now 2003, look at this. It contributed Ju-on: The Grudge 2. This is my personal favorite of the Ju-on franchise. I seem to love this one more than most people. Now Ju-on: The Grudge, I guess technically was released in early 2003 as a wide release in Japan, but I'm going off of the IMDb dates here, which are mostly film festival related. So it hit the film festival circuit in late 2002, so I'm not including the first Ju-on: The Grudge film in this analysis because of that. Next, we have One Missed Call, an entertaining ghost flick from Takashi Miike. Then we have Tales of Terror from Tokyo, a fun anthology of supernatural short films. And there you have it for 2003. Now 2013 contributed Miss Zombie, a beautiful and unique zombie film, slow-paced and artsy, but so fantastic in its overall quality that I consider it to be one of the best Japanese horror films of all time. Then we have Pet Peeve, a creepy and captivating film about strange events that plague residents of a suburban town. Grateful Dead, a nicely crafted character piece about a girl who becomes a stalker of lonely people and eventually becomes obsessed with an elderly man. We have Cult, an entertaining documentary-style film that has some odd visuals. Talk to the Dead, a surprisingly well-crafted film that revolves around the rather generic premise of a girl who attempts to contact the spirit of her dead brother. By Location, a thought-provoking film about doppelgangers who interject themselves into people's lives with dangerous consequences. The Complex, a newer one from Hideo Nakata. The story itself is rather weak, but the visuals and sound design are fantastic. Arcana, a very unorthodox movie because doppelgangers, ghosts, and thriller elements are all kind of blended together, which creates an engaging story with some interesting ideas. The Crone, one of the most entertaining, so bad it's good horror films from the last decade. This revolves around a ghost that looks like a really old woman that runs at super fast speeds. It's a Beautiful Day, pretty good flick with some international students who are targeted by two homicidal burglars. Hanako of the Toilet, yet another interpretation of this popular Japanese urban legend, but this version has a more ominous tone to it compared to some of the other installments. Yamidoga 5, 6, 7, and 8, some pretty good found footage flicks here. And then finally, the Senritsu Kaiki File films, Files 3, 4, and 5. all released in this year. These interesting documentary-style movies from Koji Shiraishi are creative enough to be memorable. Now, if you're wondering why I like these movies, check out my Asian horror playlist on this YouTube channel. Now, if we look closely here, all three of the films from 2003 are the types of onryo ghost films that people typically associate with Japanese horror. I mean, sure, there are a few defining characteristics that separate Ju-On the Grudge 2, One Missed Call, and Tales of Terror from Tokyo, but let's be honest, there's not a lot of variety here. The films of 2013, on the other hand, are far more diverse and fascinating. We have zombies, mentally unstable schoolgirls, doppelgangers, genre benders, art house style films, mainstream films, old woman ghosts who look like they came directly out of a nursing home morgue, and documentary style films that involve urban legends that are specific to Japan. So in terms of diversification of entertainment, 2013 wins by a pretty large margin. Now, we all know that quantity does not necessarily translate into good quality, but in terms of overall quality and entertainment value, I also think that 2013 wins in that category. Now, Miss Zombie alone is better than all three of the films from 2003 that I've listed here. Now, don't misunderstand me, because I really do love Ju-On the Grudge 2, but Miss Zombie has an edge in terms of creativity, artistry, and emotional impact. And this is coming from someone who enjoys all three of those films from 2003 more than the average person. I like Ju-On the Grudge 2 more than most people. I like One Missed Call more than most people. And I like Tales of Terror from Tokyo more than most people. But even I think that 2013 provides more impressive collections of titles. Now, Miss Zombie is a newer classic, in my opinion. Pet Peeve got a legitimate streaming release with subtitles at one point, but is difficult to find nowadays. But if you get your hands on that, check it out immediately, because it has a weird creepiness that is very well executed. Grateful Dead has some really good performances, and it has a dramatic impact and overall quality to it as well. Cult is a documentary-style film which has been done to death at this point, right? I mean, how many documentary-style horror films have come out since Paranormal Activity? Even Blair Witch Project and The Last Broadcast, right? So there's been a lot of these, but Koji Shiraishi is still able to infuse enough creativity into Cult to make it a memorable film that's interesting to watch. When we look at the actual films that are produced, I really believe that the best films from 2013 have more to offer than the best films from 2003. Now, keep in mind, however, that some of these films from 2013 will be divisive. Some people are not going to like them because they're not the kinds of films that your average moviegoer is going to love. You know what I mean? Ghost films in general are pretty mainstream in a lot of cases, right? It has a high probability of people liking it if it's good. Whereas on the other hand, I can understand if someone thought Miss Zombie was too slow. It moves pretty slowly. Or if Pet Peeve was too weird, because it's a pretty freaking weird movie. But those are the things that I like about Japanese horror films. I like it when they get weird and creative, especially when they get weird and creative at a high level of quality. So even if we're dealing with a flawed movie, like By Location, which contributes some attack scenes that are not quite as good or exciting as they probably should have been, it's still very thought-provoking with its content and themes. I find it to be an interesting film to watch, despite its flaws. Now, availability of these kinds of films is always fluctuating. Do keep in mind that a few of the films that I listed for 2013 never got a legitimate release with English subtitles, and those are Hanako of the Toilet and the Senritsu Kaiki File films. It's a Beautiful Day also did not receive a subtitled release, but most of the dialogue in that film is in English anyways, because you're dealing with international students who are together. So it practically doesn't matter that it's not subtitled. I watched all three of those, though, without subtitles and enjoyed them all. And I think, some people could probably do, or they would have the same experience if they're, kind of open-minded to that type of thing. But even if we exclude those and just eliminate them from the analysis and assume they're just too obscure to include, I still prefer the Japanese horror films from 2013 over 2003, even with those out of the analysis. Now, let's take a quick look at the Japanese horror films from 2003 and 2013 that I did not like. All right, here are the underwhelming ones. It's pretty lopsided again, right? But in the wrong direction for 2003. Really no point into going into a lot of detail here. I find it difficult to defend any of these movies as being good. Now, some people do enjoy the Locker films, but I do not. There is some decent stuff in the Locker, but there's a lot of cheesiness. The story's thin and kind of repetitive. Cliches are churned out like hotcakes, and the ending is pretty bad in my opinion. And I'm sure some people would disagree with my inclusion of Gozu within the underwhelming section of this analysis. I think there's a good 20 minutes of interesting content in that film, but it's surrounded by a lot of boring filler. But for the sake of argument, even if we assume that I did enjoy it and I placed it in the approved list of 2003, I still prefer 2013. The thing that really sticks out when looking at this list of bad films is just how much crap Japan exported in 2003 to international audiences. The bottom 6 films on this 2003 list are all garbage. Demon Hunting is truly one of the worst films I've seen. And the 5 titles that are listed above it are not much better. If anyone had really bothered to watch these when they came out, and they did come out on Region 1 DVD with English subtitles, if anybody watched them, they would probably understand the pain I suffered while watching all of these. And all 6 of them received, like I said, legitimate DVD releases in the US. Now, 2013, not quite as painful, right? I mean, Sadako 2 was a pile of crap, but it wasn't quite as bad as its predecessor, Sadako 3D from 2012. That one was historic in its awfulness. And that weird Volume 16 film that you see listed here is so obscure. It's unsubtitled, and I got it in Japan while on vacation. So no one will bother to seek it out. And that's a good thing, because that one stinks pretty bad. So we have a situation here where not only did 2003 contribute less good films than 2013, but it also contributed more bad films. So yeah, I emphatically give the win to 2013 when it comes to Japanese horror. It's probably not what you were expecting when you clicked on this video, but I think I've at least made a decent case for that argument here. Of course, if you personally prefer 2003 after looking at my side-by-side listings, that's cool. You know what I mean? Just make sure that you watch a good number of those titles before making that determination. You can't just skip 2013 and assume that it's worse, which is what a lot of people tend to do on the internet. A lot of people do that, because I almost never hear anyone mention these 2013 films online, positively or negatively. So Japan is in the books here, and that's a big one because Japan exports the most horror films when compared to some of the other countries we'll be looking at this evening. Right now, 2003, it looks like an NFL football team that was favored to win the Super Bowl by 14 points, but is instead losing by 14 points at halftime. So 2003 has some catching up to do if it wants to win this battle. But what about South Korea? Let's take a look at South Korea. Now, when I show you this side-by-side comparison, you'll notice it's a lot smaller than the one from Japan. To give you an idea as to why, consider the following personal statistics here. Now, I've seen on average 16 Japanese horror films from each calendar year going back to 1998. That's the average per year. Comparatively, I've only seen on average 5 Korean horror films from each calendar year during the same time period. And that's an interesting little stat to show you just how important Japan is to Asian horror. So here's my list of Korean titles that I enjoyed. These are the entertaining ones, remember. 2003 contributed A Tale of Two Sisters, which is my favorite movie of all time. Yes, I do consider it to be the best film I've ever seen from any genre or any country. That's obviously a pretty big advantage for 2003 over 2013. Let's take a look at what else we've got here, though. The Uninvited, an extremely psychological and depressing film that is underappreciated in my opinion. I tend to like this one more than most people. Wishing Stairs, the third installment in the Whispering Corridors franchise, probably the scariest of the bunch. In my opinion, it's the scariest installment of that franchise. Acacia, a good quality film that focuses primarily on the dramatic conflicts between the main characters. Now, there are some people out there who really love this movie. I think it's good, but I tend to like it a little bit less than most people. Now, 2013 was no slouch either. It contributed Mobius, a violent, depraved, and somewhat ridiculous film that will certainly rub some people the wrong way. I found it to be deliciously entertaining. Killer Toon. This one utilizes a neat premise to provide some unusual comic book style visuals at times. I tend to like this one a bit more than most people. Horror Stories 2. This anthology is the weakest of this particular trilogy of films, but there's definitely some oddball stuff to enjoy here. And then both Doctor and the Puppet are flawed films, but they're watchable, in my opinion. Now, before we continue with our discussion, let's just briefly look at the underwhelming films from these years as well from South Korea, because the list is pretty short. You get Into the Mirror from 2003, and nothing from 2013. So boom, that's it. There's a grand total of only one title from both years that I did not like. Into the Mirror, which most people actually seem to enjoy, and would likely include in their own list of entertaining films. So, hey. So take that into consideration while I continue my analysis. Now, if we look at these Korean titles, we see my favorite movie of all time, A Tale of Two Sisters. But if someone told me The Uninvited, Wishing Stairs, and Acacia were more entertaining than Mobius, Killer Toon, and Horror Stories 2, I could actually understand that opinion. In fact, I might actually agree with them, depending on my mood. You know what I mean? The Uninvited, Wishing Stairs, and Acacia is a nice little batch of films there. Now, 2013 definitely has a better variety, because most of those films from 2003 are supernatural ghost films, with the possible exception of The Uninvited, which definitely felt a lot different from the typical ghost film. But regardless of that fact, I definitely think that 2003 wins in terms of entertainment value and overall quality. Even if we exclude A Tale of Two Sisters from the discussion entirely, there's still an argument to be made that 2003 still edges out 2013. So including A Tale of Two Sisters makes it an open and shut case, in my opinion. And for those of you who enjoyed Into the Mirror, that tips the scales even further towards 2003. I mean, so just like 2013 was a clear winner for Japan, I think 2003 is the clear winner for South Korea. Now let's move on to Section 3 here, the Southeast Asian films. Now I'm grouping all of these countries together because outside of Thailand, there's been limited international access to these other Southeast Asian movie industries. Most of these are Thai horror films, unless otherwise noted in this chart here. Alright, here are the entertaining ones. 2003 contributed Ratri, Flower of the Night, a fun horror comedy that blends those genres together very well and avoids a descent into over-silliness that's prevalent in some other Thai comedies. 2013 contributed The Last Summer, a film with an interesting narrative structure because it consists of 3 different acts by 3 different directors, even though it's the same story flow. Very enjoyable stuff that has a psychological and dramatic core. P-Mak, this is a comedic adaptation of the famous Maynak legend that spins the story in a number of fun ways. Shackled from Indonesia. This is a deliberately paced psychological film that avoids jump scares in favor of a moody, surreal tone. It's good. Long Weekend. This is basically a supernatural slasher of sorts, and in that sense, it's a decent watch. And then Three Doors of Horrors from Malaysia, a watchable anthology with a short overall runtime. Now, we seem to have another lopsided scenario here, because even if we take the top film from each year and compare them, I think 2013 has an edge. As much as I enjoy Ratri, Flower of the Night, I do think that Last Summer edges it out in terms of overall quality. And then if you add P-Mak into the mix, which is kind of comparable to Ratri as a horror-comedy hybrid, the argument becomes even more compelling Then we have the oddball flick like Shackled and a few other watchable titles just to kind of pile on, right? So I do think that, well, hold on, let's check the underwhelming titles here and before we move on. So this is essentially the same situation. You know, even if we take the worst film from each year and compare them, I think 2003 has the worst film. As much as I hate Make Me Shudder, which is just garbage, I do think that Die Covery beats it out in terms of abject futility. You know, don't misunderstand me, because Make Me Shudder is a worthless film. But Die Covery is so historic in its awfulness that I dare anyone to sit through that entire film. I dare you. Then if we add those other titles for 2003 into the mix, it forms a compelling argument that 2003 made a greater number of bad films. Of course, some of you would probably exclude The Unborn and reclassify it into an entertaining film, because it does have some good elements to it. But even if you did that, I still think 2013 wins for Southeast Asian horror. Alright, the final section here. We're going to look at the Hong Kong and Chinese films from these years. Alright, let's look at the entertaining ones first. So in terms of entertaining titles, 2003 contributed nothing. I double-checked my records but found no good Hong Kong or Chinese horror films from 2003 that I've personally seen. You know, if you've missed any, let me know. Because if there's a good Hong Kong or Chinese horror film from 2003, I would certainly be interested in seeing it. Now, if you're thinking of The Eye, that came out in 2002, so that doesn't count here. And if you're thinking about other Pang Brothers films, Abnormal Beauty came out in 2004, so they kind of, you know, this is the year that's kind of wedged in between the good stuff, unfortunately. 2013 contributed Rigor Mortis. This is a modern take on the Hong Kong vampire films from back in the day. It's a cool flick. Tales from the Dark 1 and Tales from the Dark 2. These incorporate Hong Kong culture into 2 anthologies that include a total of 6 short films, all of which are worth watching and have a good overall quality to them. The Chrysalis, which I think is a neat little psychological horror film, and Midnight Train, which is watchable stuff. So this appears to be yet another open and shut case, doesn't it? I mean, we have at least 3 solid films from 2013, with Rigor Mortis and both Tales from the Dark films compared to nothing, a goose egg for 2003. Now let's check the underwhelming films here. Now, when looking at this comparison, it's pretty obvious that 2013 produced more bad movies than 2003. Baby Blues and Supernatural Events on Campus are both worse than The Park and Night Corridor. And if you've seen The Park and Night Corridor, that's saying something, because those movies are not good. Baby Blues is atrocious, and Supernatural Events on Campus is memorable in its unrelenting incompetence. But still, given the fact that we actually have some good, legit movies from 2013 compared to 0 from 2003 on the entertaining section, 2013 has to win for Hong Kong Chinese films. Has to. So, when we look at all this stuff, with the exception of South Korea, I actually prefer the Asian horror films from 2013 over 2003 for every other sector of Asia that we've covered this evening. And there are some other countries in Asia that we're not covering, either because I haven't seen many movies from those countries or they're just not readily available. There's certainly more variety and creativity on display in 2013, but I think the overall quality is better as well. So let's bring it all together here and take a look at the final tallies, which are pretty ridiculous. Entertaining films, 2003 gave us 8. 2013 gave us 29. And this excludes the Hanako of the Toilet and the Saritsu Kaiki File films, which never got subtitled releases at any point. You know, I just eliminated those in my tally here for the sake of just, eliminating films that had bad distribution. Now, the total for 2013 would be 33 if they were included. Now, these numbers seem ridiculous, right? Because you have underwhelming films. 2003 has 17, and 2013 has only 8. I mean, how can this even be possible? Well, keep in mind that more films from 2013 are available to watch when compared to 2003. In my Asian horror playlist, I reviewed 25 films from 2003 when compared to 41 films from 2013. So we have a bigger pool to choose from when exploring 2013. And do you know what? These numbers would be even more lopsided if I added the additional 2013 titles I saw fairly recently, but are not included in my Asian horror playlist reviews. Like Dead Banging and 2 of the Hirokoa films are from 2013, and I enjoy those as well. So we're talking about kind of a landslide victory here, in my opinion. Even if you took the initiative to seek out and watch every single film that I thought was entertaining from 2013, and even if you disliked 2 out of every 3 films that I recommended to you, 2013 would still outnumber 2003 in terms of entertaining movies. But again, this is all reliant on personal taste. I suppose someone could claim that, One Missed Call and Tales of Terror from Tokyo are better movies than Miss Zombie, Pet Peeve, and Grateful Dead. And they could also claim that Raw Tree Flower of the Night is better than Last Summer and P-Mock. And they could also claim that Rigor Mortis and both Tales from the Dark films from 2013 were all terrible movies that should be avoided at all costs. But someone would really have to go out of their way to not enjoy a lot of these movies from 2013 in order to kind of pull that year down to a level that's comparable to 2003. So in conclusion, I think 2013 is a better year. I think it's better. And after going through this exercise, I kind of hope you people understand why I wanted to make this discussion video and present like a side-by-side comparison of the movies that were released in each year. It basically forces us to acknowledge the existence of all of these movies and address them before coming to our own conclusions on like what year we personally prefer. Now, I'm emphasizing this point because virtually no one goes through this exercise when discussing the industry, and that includes professional critics. And this is a bit of a side topic, but it is directly related to the exercise we just performed. I'd like to talk very briefly about something that irritates me quite a bit. There's a typical writing structure that is frequently used when critics review movies online. In a lot of cases, you'll notice this. There's an introductory paragraph, or 2 or 3 even, before the actual review. And of course, when these critics are reviewing an Asian horror movie, they feel the need to drop in a line or 2 about the Asian horror boom from back in the day, the early 2000s, late 90s, and how little of interest has come out in the last 15 years. Then they usually ask the reader, before reviewing the film, if the movie they are currently reviewing will reignite the industry to the glory days of old. This is the standard introduction paragraph when critics are reviewing Asian horror movies nowadays online. I see it all the time. But what these critics kind of fail to realize is that using that introduction is problematic, because reviewing a single film is quite different from assessing an entire industry. I've said this before on this channel. Reviewing one movie requires you to watch one movie. Assessing an entire industry requires you to watch a lot of movies, right? So my reaction to this popular introductory paragraph that these critics use is to just kind of shake my head, and then I'll click on the critic's name. Well, before that, I think to myself, these critics must have sat down and watched Miss Zombie, Grateful Dead, Cult, Mobius, Killer Tune, P-Mock, Rigor Mortis, and both of the Tales of the Dark films, at the very least. And they apparently hated all of them, I guess. I mean, that's a lot of movies to not like, right? So I continue to kind of shake my head at this because I assume that it's not true. And then I click on the critic's name to see if there's some kind of article they've written to justify their opinions on the industry, and I almost never see one, right? And even if I do see something, they never discuss the aforementioned film that I listed out at any point. And we're talking about just 1 year in the 2010s. I mean, there are plenty of other films from 2012, 2014, 2015 that I think are good that these critics would need to watch and not enjoy in order to justify these like hand-waving introductory paragraphs that just kind of write off the whole industry from the past 15 years. Now, I mentioned it in my Death of J horror video, but it's kind of a cold-hearted truth. Asian horror is a lot more than the small handful of ghost films that everyone decided to watch over 10 years ago. You know what I mean? People seem to make this mistake all of the time. And they focus on the most popular films and then just assume that nothing else exists, which is why you'll never see a review of Miss Zombie or, Pet Peeve or whatever out there, right? If there's no hype behind a movie, it somehow doesn't exist. And a lot of people just ignore it and complain that nothing good has come out in the last 15 years. But again, this is no longer acceptable in the internet age because you could find this stuff out. And most of the films that we've covered tonight have been released on legitimate English subtitled DVDs, Blu-rays, or streaming sites at some point over the past 10 plus years, right? So, yeah, that introductory paragraph in those reviews does kind of get on my nerves. It just kind of represents that lazy groupthink attitude where everyone just kind of parrots popular opinions without actually watching the movies or justifying their perspectives. Again, if you watch a bunch of these and you prefer 2003, that's fine. But you need to discuss why you disliked all these films from the 2010s along the way. So what do you people think? What do you think? Do you actually prefer Asian horror movies from 2003 over 2013? Do you think I've at least made a decent case for defending 2013 and maybe that a lot of these online critics need to maybe do their homework a little bit more when discussing the industry trends before just kind of writing them off? So what do you think about this? Leave some comments in the comment section below, and we'll get a discussion going if you like. And as always, I'll see you next time.